The 50th year arrived not with a fanfare, as the greeting card industry would have you believe, but with a quiet settling, like dust on undisturbed furniture, in a room I had long forgotten I owned. It was in this room, the one papered with the faded maps of girlhood dreams, that the scent of baking bread, of yeast and warmth and possibility, began to permeate the air of my carefully ordered, slightly too sterile present. I, Eleanor Vance, who had navigated boardroom battles with a calm facade and managed household budgets with precision, found myself dreaming of flour-dusted hands and the alchemy of simple ingredients transformed. The Elderflower Pantry, I'd named it in my mind, a whimsical, hopeful name for a place that didn't exist, a place that would offer solace in a sourdough slice, comfort in a crumb. It was a foolish, tender thing, this dream, and when I finally voiced it, tentatively, over lukewarm tea with my eldest, Amelia, who was herself navigating the sharp edges of her own 30s, the response was a gentle, bewildered chill. "Mother," she'd said, her brow furrowed with a concern that felt more like a dismissal, "a bakery. At your age. It's a lot of work, isn't it? And isn't it a bit late to be starting something so demanding?" Her words, meant kindly, I'm sure, landed like small, perfectly polished stones, each one a marker on a path I was apparently too old to tread. Too old. The phrase echoed in the polite silence that followed, a silence I filled with a nod and a manufactured smile, the kind I'd perfected over years of hearing what was not said. Too old for passion, too old for risk, too old, perhaps, for joy that wasn't neatly packaged in sensible, age-appropriate pursuits like gardening, or perhaps a gentle watercolor class. Later that week, a former colleague, Richard, whom I'd met for a coffee that felt more like an obligation, offered his own brand of discouragement, cloaked in the guise of practical advice. "Eleanor, my dear," he'd boomed, his voice too loud for the quiet cafe, "starting a business now. The stress, the sheer physical effort. You should be thinking of slowing down, enjoying your retirement. Leave the frantic scrambling to the youngsters." He patted my hand, his touch patronizing, his eyes holding that familiar blend of pity and superiority. The youngsters. As if life's vibrant pulse ceased at some arbitrary chronological marker, leaving only the faint, thready beat of existence. The weight of their collective, well-intentioned skepticism pressed down, heavy and suffocating, threatening to extinguish the fragile flame of the Elderflower Pantry before it had even truly caught. I retreated into myself, the dream feeling garish and inappropriate under the harsh light of their pragmatism. For days, the dust settled anew in that forgotten room, the scent of imagined bread fading, replaced by the stale air of resignation. Was I truly just a silly old woman, clinging to an adolescent fantasy? The reflection in the mirror showed the silver threads in my hair, the map of lines etched by laughter and worry around my eyes. They were undeniable, these marks of time. But within, something resisted, a stubborn ember refusing to be snuffed out by the damp blanket of their doubts. It wasn't just a bakery, it was a reclamation, a quiet insistence that my story was not yet fully written, that its most flavorful, most nourishing chapter might still be kneaded into existence by my own hands, no matter how late the hour seemed to others. The dismissal, sharp and cold, had an unintended effect. It pricked the very core of my being, not to wound fatally, but to awaken a dormant strength, a dignified defiance I hadn't realized I still possessed. Their well-meaning, dismissive words became the grit in the oyster, the irritant around which a pearl of resolve slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to form, a silent counterpoint to their chorus of too late, too old. This resolve, it wasn't fiery or loud, it was the quiet, inexorable pressure of water shaping stone, a decision made not in a moment of dramatic rebellion, but in the deep, still hours of the night, when the world slept and my own heart beat a steady rhythm of perhaps the first step was taken in the hushed solitude of my study, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating a face set with a new, almost serene determination. Instead of seed catalogues for the sensible garden I was supposed to be cultivating, my search history filled with terms like artisan baking techniques, commercial kitchen leases, small business funding for women over 50. Each click was a small act of rebellion, a reclaiming of agency. I found a name, the Elderflower Pantry, and registered it online, the digital confirmation email a small, crisp certificate of intent. It felt momentous, that simple act, a secret pact made with myself. I began to sketch, not watercolors of tranquil landscapes, but layouts for a small, warm space, shelves filled with imaginary loaves, the air thick with the scent of cinnamon and cardamom. My old accountancy skills, dormant for years since I'd stepped back from full-time work to manage the shifting tides of family life, were dusted off. Spreadsheets bloomed on my screen, filled with projections, cost analyses, and supplier lists, the neat columns and rows a comforting framework for the burgeoning dream. I found a small, rather neglected storefront on a quiet side street, tucked away from the main thoroughfare, its windows dusty, its paint peeling, but with a large south-facing window that promised morning light. It was more a forgotten whisper of a shop than a prime location, but its very obscurity appealed to me. It felt like a place where a secret could be nurtured, where a dream could take root without the harsh glare of public scrutiny. The rent was, thankfully, modest. I signed the lease with a hand that barely trembled, the cool metal of the pen a conduit for a current of quiet excitement. The agent, a young man with a perpetually surprised expression, had raised an eyebrow when I, a woman of a certain age, as they so delicately put it, outlined my plans for a bakery. His surprise was a familiar echo, but this time it glanced off me, deflected by the new armor of my purpose. I began to clear out a room in my own home, the one that had become a repository for things no longer needed, but too sentimentally charged to discard. Old photo albums, children's school projects, relics of a life lived. As I packed them away, carefully, respectfully, I felt not a sense of loss, but of making space. Making space for new memories, new creations, a new chapter. This act of clearing was symbolic, a physical manifestation of the internal shift. The scent of lavender and old paper in that room slowly gave way to the imagined aroma of yeast and warm sugar, a phantom fragrance that fueled my late nights and early mornings. My small savings, carefully husbanded over years, became the seed capital. It wasn't much, certainly not enough to impress Richard or perhaps even Amelia, but it was mine, earned and saved, and now, purposefully deployed. The risk felt exhilarating, a counterpoint to the predictable rhythms of my recent life. This was not the frantic scrambling Richard had envisioned, it was a deliberate, measured construction, brick by brick, of a future I was choosing, not one I was being gently ushered into. The silence of my endeavor was its strength, a cocoon in which the fragile wings of the Elderflower Pantry could develop, unbuffeted by the winds of external opinion. "They're too old" still echoed, but now it sounded less like a judgment and more like a challenge, one I was meeting not with words, but with the quiet, steady rhythm of action. The path I was treading was mine alone, and each step, however small, felt like a reclaiming of self, a quiet arrival into a landscape I was meant to inhabit. The solitude of these initial preparations was a curious blend of loneliness and profound connection. Loneliness, because the dream was still so intensely private, a fragile seedling I dared not expose too widely. Connection, because in those hours spent poring over recipes, sourcing ingredients, and wrestling with the stubborn complexities of oven thermostats and sourdough starters, I felt more truly myself than I had in years. The echoes of doubt, however, were persistent, like a faint, off-key hum in an otherwise quiet room. There was the bank manager, Mr. Henderson, a man whose smile never quite reached his eyes, who reviewed my modest loan application for equipment upgrades with an air of thinly veiled condescension. "A bakery, Mrs. Vance," he'd murmured, tapping his pen on my carefully prepared business plan. It's a very competitive market, you know. And physically quite demanding. Are you quite sure, at this stage? At this stage. As if I were a patient with a terminal diagnosis, and he the kindly doctor suggesting palliative care instead of a rigorous new treatment. I met his gaze steadily, the lyrical prose of my internal monologue sharpening to a polite, but firm, "I am perfectly sure, Mr. Henderson. My projections are conservative, and my research thorough." The loan was eventually approved, but his skepticism left a residue, a faint chill that I had to consciously shake off. Then there were the well-meaning friends, like Clara, who, upon hearing a rumor of my new venture, called with a voice laced with genuine concern. "Eleanor, dear, are you all right? Starting something so big? All on your own? Shouldn't you be, I don't know, taking a cruise? Or joining that lovely book club Sylvia was talking about?" Her words, wrapped in the soft cotton wool of affection, still carried the same underlying message: this is not for you. This is not what women your age do. But amidst these gentle dissuasions, a slender thread of support emerged from an unexpected quarter. It was old Mrs. Albright, from 2 streets over, a woman well into her 80s with eyes as bright and sharp as a robin's. I encountered her at the local market, where I was tentatively inquiring about sourcing local honey. She overheard my conversation, her small, bird-like head tilted. When I explained, a little shyly, my plans for the elderflower pantry, her face, a beautiful lacework of wrinkles, broke into a genuine, delighted smile. "An artisan bakery," she chirped, her voice surprisingly strong. "Oh, my dear, how perfectly wonderful. This neighborhood has been crying out for real bread, not that dreadful sliced flannel they sell at the supermarket. You must let me be your first customer for a good, crusty sourdough." Her enthusiasm was like a sudden burst of sunshine, warming me to the core. She asked about my elderflower cordial recipe, shared a memory of her own mother's baking, and treated my venture not as a folly, but as a vital and welcome addition to the community. Her simple, unreserved belief was a balm, a counter-narrative to the chorus of doubts. It was a reminder that age did not universally equate to a diminishing of spirit, or an acceptance of limitations. In Mrs. Albright's bright eyes, I saw not a reflection of my 50 years as a barrier, but as a foundation, a rich soil from which something new and beautiful could grow. This encounter, small as it was, fortified me. It became a quiet touchstone, a reminder that while some voices might seek to confine, others could unexpectedly liberate. The journey was still solitary in many ways. The long hours spent experimenting with doughs, the frustration of a collapsed soufflé, or a burnt batch of scones, these were battles fought alone in the nascent heart of the elderflower pantry, which was still just a collection of ideas and a dusty, empty shop. But Mrs. Albright's words, and the memory of her genuine delight, echoed more loudly now than Mr. Henderson's polite skepticism, or Amelia's worried frown. They were a quiet affirmation, a whisper of yes, you can, in a world that seemed more inclined to say you shouldn't. The lyrical nature of my dream began to find its rhythm, not just in poetic reflections, but in the steady, purposeful beat of work, of creation, of bringing the elderflower pantry, slowly, meticulously, into being. The first true hurdles presented themselves not as dramatic confrontations, but as the mundane, relentless challenges that accompany any new enterprise. The ancient plumbing in the little shop decided to stage a protest the week before I was due to install the commercial sink, resulting in a minor flood and an unexpected, significant bill from a plumber who seemed to charge by the second. My carefully constructed budget groaned under the strain. For a day, I sat amidst the damp chaos, the smell of mildew momentarily overpowering the phantom scent of baking bread, and a wave of profound weariness washed over me. Amelia's concerned face, Richard's booming, "I told you so," even though he hadn't, not yet, but I could imagine it, Mr. Henderson's skeptical smile, they all crowded in, a chorus of doubt given new voice by the gurgling drains and the shrinking bank balance. Was this a sign? Was I, indeed, in over my head, a foolish woman chasing an anachronistic dream? The temptation to retreat, to call the agent and quietly relinquish the lease, was immense. It would be so easy to slip back into the comfortable, predictable anonymity of being Eleanor, retired, but then, amidst the disarray, my gaze fell upon a small, handwritten note tucked into my recipe book. It was from Mrs. Albright, a simple looking forward to that sourdough, my dear, delivered by her grandson a few days prior. Such a small thing, yet it was enough. It was a thread, slender but strong, pulling me back from the edge of despair. I took a deep breath, the scent of damp concrete and old wood surprisingly grounding. This was not a sign to quit, it was merely a problem to be solved, one of many, I was sure. The next day, I found a different plumber, an older, quieter man who fixed the issue for a fraction of the cost and offered some unsolicited, but sound, advice on maintaining old pipes. That small victory, the overcoming of a practical, messy obstacle, felt disproportionately significant. It was followed by another. After countless frustrating attempts, my sourdough starter, which I'd affectionately, if somewhat morbidly, named Hope, finally sprang to life, bubbling with a vigor that seemed to mirror my own renewed determination. The first loaf I baked with it was far from perfect, a little too dense, the crust a shade too dark, but as I sliced into it, the aroma, rich and tangy, filled my small kitchen, and the taste, earthy and complex, was a revelation. This was real. This was possible. I sourced my flour from a small, local mill, the miller a taciturn man, who let his product speak for itself. I found a farmer, who grew the most fragrant elderflowers, their blossoms like tiny, creamy stars, promising the delicate flavor that would be the signature of my pantry. Each connection made, each ingredient secured, was a small triumph, a note in the quiet symphony of creation. The physical act of painting the shop walls, a soft, buttery yellow, of sanding down old wooden shelves until they glowed with a warm patina, of choosing the simple, mismatched chairs for the two tiny tables I planned to have, these were not chores, but acts of love, of devotion. My hands, once accustomed to the smooth glide of a pen or the cool click of a keyboard, became chapped and stained, dusted with flour and paint, but they felt more alive, more purposeful. The cutting lines of past dismissal still surfaced in my reflective moments, but now they served not to wound, but to hone my resolve, like a whetstone on a blade. The sharpness was not for others, not for revenge in the conventional sense, but for myself, to carve out this space, this dream, with precision and unwavering intent. The elderflower pantry was slowly, steadily, taking tangible form, not through grand pronouncements or dramatic flourishes, but through the quiet accumulation of solved problems, small victories, and the persistent, unwavering application of hope and hard work. The scent of baking was no longer a phantom, it was beginning to cling to my clothes, my hair, a fragrant testament to the journey. The process of building the foundation of the elderflower pantry was an education in patience and resilience, a slow, meticulous accretion of details that, collectively, would breathe life into the space. The big, industrial oven, a second-hand behemoth I'd managed to acquire after weeks of searching and haggling, was finally installed. Its stainless steel facade gleamed under the newly fitted lights, a silent, powerful heart waiting to beat warmth into the little shop. Learning its quirks, its hot spots, its temperament, felt like getting to know a new, rather formidable personality. There were days of burnt offerings and undercooked centers, each failure a small, smoky lesson. My meticulously planned schedule often unraveled in the face of recalcitrant dough that refused to rise, or a sudden shortage of a crucial ingredient. The long hours stretched, blurring the edges of days and nights. Often, I would arrive before dawn, the streets still cloaked in a pre-dawn hush, the only sounds the distant hum of the city waking and the click of the key in the lock of my little shop. And I would leave long after dusk, weary to my bones, the scent of yeast and sugar a permanent perfume. In those solitary hours, the silence of the empty street outside was broken only by the hum of the refrigerator, the rhythmic thud of kneading, the occasional sigh of the old building settling around me. It was a lonely endeavor, in many ways. Amelia, though trying to be supportive from a distance, was caught up in her own demanding career and young family. My circle of friends, mostly navigating their own transitions into quieter phases of life, couldn't quite grasp the all-consuming nature of this undertaking. Their calls, filled with suggestions for leisurely lunches or afternoon cinema trips, only highlighted the different path I had chosen. "You must be exhausted, Eleanor," became a common refrain, tinged with a familiar note of concern that still, sometimes, felt like a gentle judgment. Yet, this solitude was not entirely unwelcome. It was in these quiet, focused hours that the lyrical descriptions of my dream found their truest expression, not in words, but in the careful crimp of a pie crust, the precise scoring of a loaf, the delicate arrangement of berries on a tart. Each creation was a verse in an ongoing poem, a testament to a craft I was slowly, painstakingly mastering. The physical toll was undeniable. My back ached, my feet throbbed, my hands were a roadmap of small burns and calluses. There were moments, late at night, surrounded by the detritus of a long day's baking, when the sheer enormity of what I had undertaken would wash over me, and the old whispers of "too old for this" would try to find purchase. But then, the morning would come, and the ritual of unlocking the door, the first scent of cool flour, the promise of transformation held within simple ingredients, would rekindle the quiet fire. I began to develop a rhythm, a choreography of tasks that became almost meditative. The weighing, the mixing, the kneading, the shaping, the patient waiting for the rise, the careful tending of the oven, each step a mindful practice. I discovered a deep, almost primal satisfaction in the transformation of humble components into something nourishing and beautiful. The dismissive comments I had once received, Richard's patronizing pat, Mr. Henderson's skeptical gaze, Amelia's gentle concern, they were still there, filed away in my memory, but their power had diminished. They were no longer sharp barbs, but rather distant echoes, fuel for a quiet, internal engine of proving not them wrong, but myself right. My revenge, if it could be called that, was not in confrontation, but in the steady, undeniable creation of the Elderflower Pantry. It was in the growing confidence in my own hands, in the emerging beauty of the space, in the comforting, life-affirming aroma of baking bread that was beginning to permanently perfume the air of this once-forgotten corner of the street. The dream was taking tangible, fragrant, delicious form, and it was a testament not to youthful energy, but to the enduring power of a vision pursued with quiet, unwavering passion, regardless of the calendar year. There was no grand opening, no ribbon-cutting ceremony, no champagne toasts. The Elderflower Pantry opened its doors on a Tuesday morning in early autumn, as quietly and unobtrusively as a new bud unfurling. I simply unlocked the door, turned the closed sign to open, and arranged a modest display of what I hoped was my best work, a few crusty sourdough loaves, their surfaces intricately scored, a tray of glistening morning buns, their cinnamon sugar perfume already beginning to drift onto the pavement, a rustic apple galette, its free-form charm a deliberate counterpoint to a more formal patisserie. A small, hand-lettered sign in the window, penned in my neatest script, simply read, "The Elderflower Pantry. Artisan breads and bakes. Welcome." For the first hour, nothing happened. I busied myself wiping down the already gleaming counter, rearranging the small vase of late asters Mrs. Albright had brought by the previous evening, my heart a nervous hummingbird in my chest. The silence of the shop was broken only by the ticking of the old clock I'd found at a flea market, and the distant rumble of traffic. The anxiety was a cold knot in my stomach. What if no one came? What if this whole endeavor, this monumental effort, was met with nothing but indifference? What if they were all right, and I was just a foolish old woman playing shop. Then, the bell above the door tinkled, a cheerful, unexpected sound. A young woman, a student by the look of her, clutching a satchel of books, peered in curiously. Her eyes widened slightly as she took in the warm yellow walls, the shelves of bread, the scent that now unmistakably filled the air. "Oh," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "This smells amazing." She bought a morning bun, her praise genuine and unforced, and as she left, she promised to tell her friends. Her £5 note, the first across the counter, felt like a treasure. Shortly after, Mrs. Albright arrived, leaning on her cane, her bright eyes taking everything in with undisguised delight. "Eleanor, my dear," she declared, her voice filling the small space with warmth. "It's even more wonderful than I imagined." She purchased her promised sourdough loaf, handling it with reverence, and a small pot of my homemade elderflower cordial. Throughout the day, a slow trickle of customers found their way in. Some were residents from the nearby streets, drawn by curiosity or the enticing aroma. Others were passers-by who paused, intrigued by the unassuming charm of the little shop. Each interaction was a small affirmation. I found myself talking about fermentation times and flour types with an ease that surprised me. My earlier anxieties began to recede, replaced by a quiet, steady hum of activity. There was no dramatic rush, no queue forming down the street, and for that, I was almost grateful. This gentle unfolding felt right, allowing me to find my rhythm, to manage the small transactions and interactions with a calm I hadn't anticipated. Not everyone was immediately won over. I overheard a snippet of conversation between two women who peered through the window but didn't enter another one of these fancy bread places. Probably terribly expensive, their skepticism was a faint echo of earlier doubts, but it lacked the personal sting. My prices were fair, reflecting the quality of the ingredients and the labor involved, and I knew, with a quiet certainty that was new to me, that those who appreciated true, handcrafted food would understand. By the end of that first day, as I counted the modest takings, a profound sense of weary satisfaction settled over me. The elderflower pantry was real. It had breathed its first, fragrant breath. It was not a grand, resounding success, not yet, but it was a start, a quiet beginning born of resilience and a dream stubbornly held. The lights of the little shop cast a warm glow onto the darkening street, a small beacon of warmth and handcrafted goodness, a testament to the fact that it is never too old, never too late, to bake your own damn bread. The quiet opening of the elderflower pantry was followed by days and weeks of steady, incremental growth, a slow burn of recognition that was far more gratifying than any sudden blaze of fame would have been. Word began to spread, not through aggressive marketing campaigns, for which I had neither the budget nor the inclination, but through the most ancient and effective of methods, word of mouth. The student who bought the first morning bun did indeed tell her friends, and soon a small, but regular contingent of them would appear late morning, their chatter and laughter bringing a youthful energy to the quiet street. Mrs. Albright, true to her word, became a devoted regular, not just for the sourdough, but for the conversations, the shared moments of community that blossomed around the simple act of buying bread. She would bring me cuttings from her garden, or a particularly interesting article she'd read, her presence a constant, gentle affirmation. Slowly, the subtle shifts began. The local greengrocer, Mr. Henderson, a different, much kinder Henderson than the bank manager, started buying a few of my loaves to sell in his own shop, his initial skepticism replaced by a grudging admiration after his wife declared my rye bread the best she'd ever tasted. A small, independent cafe a few blocks away asked if I could supply them with croissants and pastries. Each new order, each new regular customer, was a quiet validation. The quality of the ingredients, the meticulous care I poured into every bake, began to speak for itself. My hands, though often aching, moved with increasing confidence and skill, the rhythms of kneading, shaping, and baking becoming an extension of my own breath. I learned to read the dough, to understand its moods and needs, a silent, intuitive dialogue. The lyrical nature of my work deepened, expressed not just in the aesthetics of a perfectly formed loaf, but in the consistent excellence that people began to associate with the Elderflower Pantry. I found a particular joy in the seasonal offerings: rhubarb tarts in spring, berry galettes in summer, spiced apple cakes in autumn, rich, dark fruit breads in winter. Each season brought its own palette of flavors and inspirations, a rhythm that connected my small urban bakery to the larger, timeless cycles of nature. The naysayers, the ones who had so confidently predicted failure or exhaustion, began to hear whispers of my quiet success. Amelia called one evening, a new note of surprised respect in her voice. "Mom," she said, "Sarah from my office was raving about some amazing bakery near her flat, the Elderflower Pantry. She had no idea it was yours. She said their sourdough is legendary." There was a pause, and then, softly, I'm really proud of you." Her words, simple and sincere, were a balm, healing a small, lingering ache I hadn't fully acknowledged. I didn't crow, didn't remind her of her earlier doubts. There was no need. The quiet triumph was in her tone, in the unspoken admission that perhaps she, and others, had underestimated me. My confidence, too, was undergoing a subtle transformation. It wasn't the brash assertiveness I'd sometimes had to employ in my former career, but a deeper, more centered self-assurance. It came from the tangible reality of what I was building, from the positive feedback, from the simple, profound satisfaction of creating something good and sharing it with others. The poetic justice, as I sometimes thought of it, was not about seeing others proven wrong in a humiliating way, but about witnessing the gentle, undeniable flourishing of something they had dismissed. It was the quiet poetry of resilience, the subtle beauty of a late bloom proving to be the most vibrant. The Elderflower Pantry was becoming more than just a shop. It was a small hub, a place where people connected, if only briefly, over the shared appreciation of good food, made with care. And I, Eleanor Vance, once defined by my past roles and encroaching age, was becoming Eleanor of the Elderflower Pantry, a woman who, it turned out, was just getting started. One crisp afternoon, as the scent of baking gingerbread began to mingle with the usual yeasty aroma of the shop, the bell above the door tinkled, and Richard, my former colleague, walked in. He looked around, his expression one of utter astonishment, taking in the warm, bustling atmosphere the few small tables occupied, the shelves artfully laden, the general hum of quiet appreciation. He hadn't sought me out. He'd been in the neighborhood for an unrelated appointment and had, I later gathered, been drawn in by the scent and the uncharacteristic signs of life on this usually sleepy side street. For a moment, he didn't recognize me, covered as I was in a fine dusting of flour, my hair tied back simply, my face flushed from the heat of the ovens. Then, his eyes met mine, and a slow wave of comprehension, followed by a distinct discomfort, washed over his features. "Eleanor," he said, his booming voice softer now, almost hesitant. "My goodness. Is this yours?" I simply smiled, a calm, genuine smile that held no trace of past resentment, only the quiet confidence of my present reality. "Richard," I said, my voice even. "Yes, it is. Welcome to the Elderflower Pantry. Can I help you with something? The gingerbread is just out of the oven." His gaze swept again over the small, thriving enterprise, the undeniable evidence of my success. The air was thick not just with the scent of spices, but with the unspoken words of his past dismissal, "Leave the frantic scrambling to the youngsters." I had no idea, he stammered, looking genuinely flustered. "It's quite something." He bought a loaf of rye bread, perhaps the very kind Mr. Henderson the greengrocer's wife now championed, and a slice of gingerbread, his movements a little awkward, his usual bombast entirely deflated. As I handed him his purchases, he met my eye again, a flicker of something unreadable in his respect. Regret? Well done, Eleanor, he said, the words quiet, almost grudging, but sincere enough. Truly well done, and then he was gone, leaving behind the faint, incongruous scent of his expensive cologne, quickly absorbed by the more robust, honest aromas of the bakery. I didn't feel a surge of vindictive triumph, no desire to rub his nose in his past misjudgment. Instead, there was a sense of quiet closure. His astonishment, his revised opinion, were merely external confirmations of an internal truth I had already come to embrace. I was capable, I was resilient, and my age was not a limitation, but a source of experience and perspective. Later that week, Mr. Henderson from the bank, the skeptical one, happened to be walking past. He paused, looked in the window for a long moment, his expression unreadable from a distance. He didn't come in, but I saw him nod slowly before continuing on his way. It was a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but it felt significant. These encounters were not sought, but they served as quiet markers on my journey. The graceful vengeance, if one could call it that, was simply the undeniable reality of the Elderflower Pantry's existence, its warmth, its fragrance, its gentle hum of success. My internal reflection on these moments was not one of smugness, but of a quiet, settled satisfaction. The path had been challenging, often solitary, but it was mine, every flower-dusted step of it. The real victory wasn't in their changed perceptions, but in my own. I no longer needed their validation. I had found it within myself, within the tangible, delicious reality of the dream I had dared to pursue when they said it was too late. The Elderflower Pantry, in its quiet, unassuming way, was my eloquent, fragrant reply. The seasons turned, and the Elderflower Pantry settled into a comforting rhythm, a beloved fixture in the small tapestry of the neighborhood. It was no longer just Eleanor Vance's new venture. It was a place with its own distinct personality, its own loyal patrons, its own quiet hum of life. The business was not just surviving, it was flourishing, in a modest, sustainable way that felt deeply right. I had learned to anticipate the ebbs and flows, the Saturday morning rush for sourdough, the quiet Tuesday afternoons perfect for experimenting with new recipes, the pre-holiday frenzy for fruitcakes and spiced cookies. The initial anxieties had largely faded, replaced by a steady, focused energy and a profound sense of purpose. I even hired a young assistant, Chloe, a bright culinary school graduate, with a passion for baking and a refreshing lack of preconceived notions about what a woman of my age should or shouldn't be doing. Her youthful enthusiasm and creative ideas blended surprisingly well with my more traditional approach, and together we expanded the offerings, introducing delicate financiers, savory tarts, and even a small range of homemade jams and chutneys that flew off the shelves. Chloe's presence allowed me a little more breathing room, a chance to step back occasionally and appreciate what had been built, not just with my own hands, but with the support of a community that had embraced my too-old dream. The Elderflower Pantry became a small hub. People didn't just come for the bread, they came for a moment of warmth, a friendly word, a sense of connection in an increasingly disconnected world. Old Mrs. Albright held court at one of the small tables most mornings, sharing stories and dispensing unsolicited, but usually wise advice to anyone who would listen. Young mothers with prams would stop for a coffee and a pastry, grateful for a welcoming space. Local artists displayed their work on the buttery yellow walls, adding another layer of local flavor. I had created not just a business, but a community, however small, and that, I realized, was perhaps the most fulfilling part of it all. The financial rewards were modest, but sufficient. More valuable was the immeasurable currency of daily satisfaction, of seeing the joy on someone's face as they bit into a perfectly flaky croissant, of hearing the quiet murmur of contented conversations. of knowing that I was contributing something good, something real, to the world around me. My identity had subtly, irrevocably shifted. I was no longer primarily defined by my past roles: wife, mother, former executive, or by the number of years I had lived. I was Eleanor, the baker, the founder of the Elderflower Pantry, a woman who had taken a late life leap and landed, firmly and gracefully, on her own 2 feet. The symbolism of it all was not lost on me. Like the sourdough starter, hope, which needed time, patience, and the right conditions to flourish, my own latent dreams had finally found their moment. The seeds of an old passion, dismissed and buried for years, had, against the odds, sprouted and grown into something strong and nourishing. This flourishing was quiet, without fanfare, but it was deep and true. The empty spaces in my life, the ones I hadn't even consciously acknowledged until the dream of the bakery began to take root, were now filled with the scent of baking, the rhythm of work, the warmth of human connection. It was a different kind of success than the one I'd known in my earlier career, less about ambition, and more about authenticity, less about climbing a ladder, and more about cultivating a garden. And it was, I knew with a certainty that resonated in my very bones, infinitely more rewarding. The final word, I came to understand, was not something to be spoken aloud, not a witty retort, or a triumphant declaration aimed at those who had doubted. It was, instead, the silent, fragrant, undeniable reality of the Elderflower Pantry itself, and the quiet joy that now permeated my days. As I stood in the bakery one late afternoon, the golden hour light slanting through the south-facing window, illuminating the motes of flour dancing in the air, a profound sense of peace settled over me. The last customers had departed, leaving behind the pleasant hum of satisfaction and the lingering scent of warm bread and coffee. Chloe was meticulously cleaning the big mixer, humming softly to herself. Outside, the autumn leaves swirled along the pavement, but inside, there was a timeless warmth, a sanctuary I had built with my own hands, from a dream they said was past its season. The echoes of "too old, too late, shouldn't you be slowing down," were now so distant they were almost indiscernible, like the faint, scratchy notes of a song long ended. They no longer held any sting, any power to diminish. Instead, they served as a faint, almost amusing counterpoint to the vibrant, present reality. My reflection in the polished surface of the espresso machine showed a woman with more silver in her hair than when this journey began, a few more lines etched around her eyes, yes, but those eyes held a new light. A calm confidence that had been forged in the fires of the oven and the quiet crucible of self-belief. This was the face of a woman who had not retreated, not faded, but had, instead, chosen to bloom, spectacularly, in her own time. The vindication was not in proving others wrong, but in proving myself right to listen to that persistent inner whisper, right to believe in the enduring power of a passion, right to rewrite the script that age and societal expectation had tried to impose. The lyrical language of my initial dream had found its full expression not in words, but in the texture of a perfect crumb, the gleam of a fruit tart, the contented sigh of a customer. The Elderflower Pantry was my poem, my quiet symphony, my most eloquent statement. As I locked the door that evening, the bell giving its familiar cheerful tinkle, I looked back at the warm glow emanating from within. It was more than a bakery. It was a testament to the enduring human spirit, to the quiet power of starting over, at any age. The final word was this, the sweet, sustaining aroma of bread, baked with love, in a place where dreams, no matter how long deferred, could, and did, rise. And it was delicious.